I'm Julia Carter. I'm 31 years old, and today was supposed to be just another family, BBQ. The sun was out, the grill was smoking, and kids were chasing bubbles across my in-laws' backyard. It was the kind of afternoon where the ice in your drink melts faster than you can sip it. The air was thick with the smell of barbecued ribs, sunscreen, and subtle tension, the kind that hums quietly beneath the surface of every Carter family gathering. I was holding a tray of lemonade, weaving my way through lawn chairs and picnic blankets, when I heard her voice clear, loud, and laced with the kind of sarcasm that cuts deeper than it should. "If Julia disappeared tomorrow," my mother-in-law Dolores laughed, "no one would even notice." The words hit like a slap. No warning, no follow-up laugh to soften the blow. Just silence. And then, laughter. Light chuckles from the uncles, forced smiles from the cousins. Someone even clinked a beer bottle. I stood there, tray in hand, stunned into stillness. For a second, I couldn't move. Not because the joke was new, but because this was the fourth time she'd said something like that in public. Only this time, she made sure everyone heard. I caught my husband Mark's eye. He was sitting on the deck beside his older brother, sipping a beer, wearing that same neutral mask he always wore when his mother made her jabs. He didn't say a word, didn't laugh, didn't wince. He just blinked, took another sip, and turned back to the conversation. Like I was invisible. I didn't drop the tray. I didn't cry. I didn't storm off. Instead, I smiled. The kind of practiced, polite smile you learn when you've been married into a family that believes civility is more important than kindness. I placed the lemonade down on the side table, excused myself to the bathroom, and shut the door behind me before the breath I'd been holding finally escaped. There, in Dolores Carter's perfectly polished guest bathroom, complete with monogrammed hand towels and that overwhelming lavender diffuser, I looked at myself in the mirror and tried to convince myself that what just happened didn't matter. But it did. Because it wasn't just a joke. It was a declaration. A public stamp of my irrelevance. And this time, everyone heard it. Let me back up a little. When I married Mark 6 years ago, I thought I was marrying him, his shy smile, his gentle heart, his loyalty. I didn't realize I was also marrying into a hierarchy. One where Dolores Carter sat at the throne, ruling with a silver tongue and a perfectly manicured fist. She wasn't the stereotypical monster-in-law. No, Dolores was much more dangerous than that. She was charming, regal, polished. The kind of woman who complimented your dress just before asking if you got it on sale. She'd welcome you into her home with open arms and serve you tea while reminding you that your roast chicken could use a little more salt next time. She smiled when she insulted you. And somehow, you ended up thanking her for it. From the moment we got engaged, she made it clear I wasn't who she envisioned as her son's wife. "I always thought Mark would end up with someone a little more refined," she told me once, pretending to stir her coffee while watching my reaction. "What do you mean by refined?" I'd asked naively. "Oh, don't be so sensitive, darling," she waved. "You know what I mean. Someone who understands our world, who comes from people like us." People like us. That phrase would haunt me for years. Because what she really meant was someone whose parents were professors or business owners, not school teachers. Someone who knew which fork to use during a 5-course meal. Someone who spent summers in Martha's Vineyard, not lifeguarding at the local pool. Still, I tried. God, did I try. I laughed at her backhanded compliments. I volunteered to host family dinners. I baked her favorite lemon squares for her birthday, even after she told me the crust was too thick. I wore the pearls she gifted me, the same ones she once said made my neck look a bit shorter, but charming nonetheless. I sat through her garden club stories, her tennis anecdotes, her book club summaries, where she claimed to love every novel but never remembered the main character's name. And for what? To be told that I wouldn't be missed if I disappeared? In that bathroom, the weight of the years pressed down on my chest. Not just Dolores' words, but Mark's silence. His absence in all of this. His consistent, suffocating neutrality. I closed my eyes and let the sound of laughter from the yard seep through the open window. Dolores was holding court again, probably recapping her joke to someone who hadn't heard it the first time. And just then, like the universe had enough of her, Toomey phone buzzed. A text from my sister-in-law, Rebecca. "Girl, tell me you heard that." Followed by a video. I pressed play. There it was. Dolores, her wine glass in hand, eyes twinkling with malicious amusement, saying it again loud, clear, smug. If Julia disappeared tomorrow, no one would even notice. The video was only 10 seconds long, but I knew that those 10 seconds were about to change everything. Because Rebecca, bless her impulsive soul, had already uploaded it, not privately, not to the family group chat, but on TikTok, and it was already starting to blow up. 37 comments in 3 minutes. Hundreds of likes. One comment pinned. "This woman is a menace. Julia, blink twice if you need us to adopt you." I stared at my reflection again, really stared. And for the first time in years, I didn't see the woman Dolores had made me feel like. I saw someone worth defending. Not just by strangers on the internet, but by myself. Outside, the BBQ continued. The music got louder. Someone was calling for Mark to bring out more hot dogs. But I didn't move. Not yet. Because somewhere in my chest, beneath the years of forced politeness and swallowed tears, something had begun to shift. Not rage, not even revenge, but clarity. And it came with a single, simple question I hadn't asked myself in years. Why am I still trying to be part of a family that never wanted me in the first place? That day at the BBQ wasn't the end of the story. It was the spark. Because what came next wasn't just a public reckoning for Dolores. It was a full transformation. Of me. Of Mark. Of our marriage. And of the version of myself I had buried to survive in that backyard for far too long. But we'll get to that. For now, just know this. Sometimes all it takes is one cruel sentence at a BBQ spoken by the wrong person, recorded by the right one to set a woman free. Growing up, I was taught that families weren't perfect, but they were worth fighting for. My mom used to say, "You don't walk out on family just because it's hard. You stay, you talk it out, you try again." She was a middle school math teacher and the kindest soul I knew. She believed in second chances, even when people didn't deserve them. Maybe that's why I stayed in this marriage far longer than I should have. I kept believing that if I just tried harder, things would get better. The first time I met Dolores, she wore ivory cashmere and pearls. It was the night Mark brought me home for dinner. He was nervous. I thought it was because he cared so much about me. Now, I realize he was just scared of her. Dolores opened the door with a warm smile that never reached her eyes. "You're Julia," she said, looking me up and down. I imagined someone taller. That was how it began. The micro-comments. The veiled disapproval. The warm tone laced with frost. She led me inside her cathedral-clean house, where classical music floated softly from the speakers and a candle flickered in a crystal holder. I remember feeling like I'd stepped onto a movie set, one where I didn't know my lines. At dinner, Dolores complimented the salad she made but added that Mark always loved homemade dressing. Mine came from a bottle. "Julia has a job in marketing," Mark said proudly. "Marketing?" Dolores replied, tilting her head like she was trying to remember the word. "That's fun." The word fun hung in the air like an insult. Not impressive, not meaningful. Just fun. I tried to laugh it off. I always tried. When Mark proposed, she gave me a hug so tight it felt like a warning. She whispered into my ear, "Marriage is harder than it looks, dear, especially when you come from simpler roots." Simpler roots. She meant that my parents still lived in the same modest house I grew up in. That my dad fixed cars in a shop he owned, and that my mom clipped coupons not because she had to, but because she liked being smart with money. Dolores, on the other hand, came from a long line of polished, pretentious people who believed brand names equaled class and money meant morals. She wore her pedigree like perfume, heavy and inescapable. During the wedding planning, she took over everything. Not offered to help, took over. The venue was her choice. The florist, her cousin's referral. She changed the seating chart without asking me, claiming, "It'll flow better this way." When I pushed back, just Ansish smiled sweetly and said, "Of course, darling. It's your day. Even if it's not what I would have done." That became her mantra. It's your life, even if it's not what I would have done. It showed up everywhere. When we bought our first home, this neighborhood, well, at least it's up and coming. When we adopted our rescue dog, a mutt, I always thought Mark was more of a purebred man. When I cut my hair short, oh, bold choice, you'll grow it back, right? And then came the baby. Our daughter, Ava, was born premature, 5 pounds, 6 ounces. I was terrified, exhausted, desperate for comfort. Dolores visited the hospital in pearls and a silk scarf. She leaned over Ava's incubator, smiled, and said, "Oh, I guess some babies just take longer to look. Cute." I should have kicked her out right then. But I was weak, postpartum, foggy, and Mark, God love him, stood beside her, saying nothing, just staring down at his phone like that glowing rectangle would solve everything. It was always like that. Dolores would throw the dart, and Mark would pretend the bullseye didn't exist. I didn't hear her say that, he'd claim. She didn't mean it like that, he'd insist. You're too sensitive, he'd shrug. Each time, his silence hurt more than her words. Because words I could handle. But silence erased me. And I think, somewhere along the line, I started to erase myself too. I stopped inviting friends over because I didn't want to explain Dolores. I stopped talking about work around her because she'd scoff at Instagram marketing like it was a toddler's hobby. I stopped wearing bright lipstick to family events after she said it made me look a bit loud. And eventually, I stopped expecting Mark to defend me. The scariest part is how easy it was to get used to being invisible. They say the worst kind of manipulation isn't loud, it's slow. Like boiling a frog. The water warms gradually until you don't notice you're being cooked alive. That's how Dolores operated. With subtle cruelty and white wine smiles. By the time our 3rd anniversary rolled around, I was numb. I didn't even react when she gave me a how-to book on marriage as a gift. Love like a lady, lead like a wife. Inscribed on the inside cover in her signature cursive. For Julia, because marriage is a skill, not a right. I laughed. Everyone laughed. And inside, something in me cracked just a little more. But nothing compared to that BBQ. That sentence, that joke, that moment. Because for once, I wasn't the only one who heard it. I wasn't the only one pretending it was just a joke. And I wasn't alone in thinking it crossed a line. Something about that recording, the way she said it with a smirk, like she was testing the limits of how far she could go, landed differently. Not just with me, but with the internet. Thousands of people who'd never met Dolores saw exactly what I'd been dealing with. They didn't just validate me. They woke me up. I wasn't being too sensitive. I wasn't misinterpreting. And most importantly, I wasn't the problem. That night, when we got home from the BBQ, Mark barely spoke. He saw the video too. He saw the comments, the views. But all he said was, "My mom's old school. She doesn't mean anything by it." I remember staring at him and thinking, how many years have I wasted trying to be liked by someone who enjoys not liking me? The answer hurt. But the truth? It lit a fire. A quiet one. Controlled. Focused. Because the woman who walked into that BBQ, she was tired. Trained to smile. Tamed. The woman who walked out? She was just waking up. I didn't say anything on the drive home. Mark didn't ask. He tapped the steering wheel to the beat of some overplayed pop song, humming under his breath like the day had ended in laughter and lemonade in a public humiliation heard by 24 relatives and now, possibly, 200,000 strangers. I watched the trees blur past the passenger window, gripping my phone like a lifeline. The video had crossed 300,000 views. Comments were pouring in. "This woman is evil. Divorce him, bestie. You disappeared? I would have flipped that table." Some were funny. Some were angry. All of them were validating in a way Mark never had been. I used to cry after Dolores's insults. Quiet tears in the bathroom. Showers where the water hid the sobs. But that night, I didn't cry. I sat on the edge of our bed, fully clothed, and stared at the wedding photo on our dresser. Me in lace, him in navy blue. Dolores in the background, her eyes fixed on Mark like he was a prize she'd almost lost. I remember what she said to me that day right before I walked down the aisle. "Make sure he never regrets this, Julia. Otherwise, he'll come home and you won't be there." I thought it was poetic at the time. I was wrong. It was a warning. The days after the BBQ felt like walking through fog dense, heavy, but familiar. Dolores called, left a voicemail. "Darling, I hope you're not upset. You know I joke. Everyone laughed, didn't they?" I didn't respond. Mark sent her a text. "Don't worry, she's just tired. She'll come around." He didn't show me the message. I saw it over his shoulder while he was brushing his teeth. That was the moment I stopped hoping for change. It didn't come like thunder. There was no outburst or slammed doors, just a quiet realization. He would never choose me, not if it meant choosing against her. And so I stopped trying. Not in a bitter, dramatic way. I just went still. I stopped baking Dolores's favorite lemon bars for family dinners. I stopped complimenting her outfits. I stopped pretending her jokes were funny. I stopped defending Mark to my friend. I stopped defending myself to Mark. I didn't pick a fight. I just didn't flinch anymore. 2 weeks passed. The video hit 1.1 million views. My inbox was filled with interview requests, collaboration offers, anonymous emails from women across the world thanking me for sharing what they'd been too afraid to say. I hadn't even spoken yet. All I did was exist in camera. In pain, and people saw me. Really saw me. It was addictive. But Mark didn't want to talk about it. "That video was taken out of context," he muttered one night as we cleaned up dinner. "What's the context where that joke is okay?" I asked. He didn't answer. Instead, he washed the dishes in silence while I packed Ava's lunch. The clink of silverware in the sink was the only thing between us. A slow, metallic metronome marking the space where love used to be. Later that night, after Ava was asleep, I pulled out my laptop and started writing. At first, it was just for me, a journal entry. But by 2 a.m., it had turned into something more. A story, a confession, a map through the maze I'd been trapped in for years. I titled it, "The Invisible Daughter-in-Law," and I posted it anonymously. By sunrise, it had 10,000 shares. By lunch, 50,000. People weren't just reading. They were pouring out their own stories, hundreds of women writing things like, "This is exactly my MIL. My husband does the same things, Miles, and says nothing. You're not alone. Thank you for saying it out loud." And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like the outsider. I felt like part of something bigger. A quiet, collective uprising of women who had been gaslit, minimized, silenced, and were finally done pretending everything was fine. Mark saw the blog 2 days later. He stormed into the living room, holding his phone like it was a weapon. "Why would you post this?" I didn't use names. "Everyone knows it's us, Julia. My mother knows it's her." She knew before I ever typed a word. He ran his hands through his hair, pacing. "You made us look bad." I looked up from my laptop, calm. "Number, I told the truth. If the truth makes us look bad, maybe we are." That stopped him. He stared at me like he didn't recognize the woman sitting on the couch in yoga pants, typing her second blog post with her legs crossed and a cup of tea cooling beside her. I wasn't trying to be dramatic, or mean, or vengeful. I was just tired of disappearing. A week later, I got invited to speak on a podcast. The host had read my post and wanted me to share my story anonymously. I hesitated, then said yes. I told myself I was doing it for other women. But deep down, I was doing it for the version of myself I used to be. The one who smiled through insult after insult. The one who swallowed tears at dinner tables. The one who had stopped laughing out loud at parties because Dolores once said her laugh was a bit much for indoors. The podcast episode dropped on a Thursday. By Friday morning, it had 200,000 streams. By Sunday, I had an agent, a woman named Elle, who specialized in storytelling through trauma. She emailed me. "You've struck a nerve. People aren't just entertained, they're empowered. If you're open to it, I think your voice could go even further." Mark saw the email while looking for a charger in our shared drawer. He didn't congratulate me. He said, "So you're a celebrity now?" I closed my laptop. "Number, I'm just not silent anymore." I started sleeping in the guest room after that. There wasn't a big fight, just space. And in that space, I started growing. My voice, my identity, my spine. The version of me Dolores always tried to shrink was starting to expand again. I didn't tell her. I didn't have to. Because she would feel it, eventually. And when she did, that's when everything would really begin to unravel. It happened on a Tuesday. I was dropping Ava off at preschool, halfway through tying her tiny pink shoelaces, when my phone buzzed 3 times in a row, then 5, then 10. At first, I thought something was wrong. But when I finally unlocked it, what I saw wasn't an emergency. It was an eruption. The BBQ clip, the one where Dolores joked that no one would notice if I disappeared, had been reposted by a popular creator who did commentary on toxic family dynamics. She added a stitched response, mouth agape, eyes wide, captioned, "She said this and they laughed." That video alone had over 4 million views. The original clip? Over 10 million and counting. I scrolled through the comments in disbelief. Imagine saying this to your daughter-in-law while she's holding lemonade for your guests. She's jealous, 100% jealous. This woman is every reason why I set boundaries with my MIL. Julia, if you disappeared, I'd riot. I don't even know you, but I'm proud of you. There were memes, duets, reaction videos, with tears, with rage, with story times from people who had gone through the exact same emotional gut punches. And just like that, without even showing my face, I became a symbol. The woman who didn't fight back, who didn't scream, who stood there, hurt and frozen, and somehow represented thousands. By noon, I was trending on Twitter under number Justice for Julia. I didn't start it. I didn't even comment. But there it was on the front page of the internet. A woman I had never met started a thread. I don't know Julia, but I know that moment when someone humiliates you in front of a crowd and everyone laughs, and you're just supposed to smile and take it. We've all been Julia. We need to stop letting this be normal. The thread had 89,000 likes by dinner. It wasn't just sympathy, it was rage. And not just at Dolores, but at Mark too. Screenshots of his expression in the background. Zoom-ins. Breakdowns. Husband did nothing. Stared at his beer like he was watching the game while his wife was humiliated. The silence of men is half the problem. If my man didn't defend me after that, he'd be holding a mirror and asking where it all went wrong. It was surreal. People I'd never met were dissecting my marriage in real time, drawing diagrams, making reaction TikToks, sharing their own stories. And the worst part? They weren't wrong. Mark had done nothing, said nothing, and now the whole world saw what I'd been trying to hide. When he got home that night, he looked like someone who had just found out the internet was real. "I just got 3 missed calls from HR," he said, tossing his briefcase down. "People at work are sending me memes of my mother, Julia. She made a joke about me disappearing. On camera. You think I don't know that now?" he snapped. "I'm being humiliated." I stared at him, trying to find even a sliver of irony in his voice. Nothing. "You're being humiliated?" He ran a hand through his hair. "She didn't mean it. You know how she is. This whole thing is out of control." "No," I said calmly. "This whole thing is finally being seen for what it is." Mark paced the room. "People are calling me spineless." I didn't answer, because, honestly, that wasn't an unfair description. "Tell them it was a misunderstanding," he said suddenly. "Say it was a joke. Say you weren't offended." I was offended. He froze, stared at me. "So you're just going to let this spiral?" "Mark, I didn't ask for this. I didn't upload the video. I didn't ask strangers to care, but they do." He looked stunned. Like he couldn't understand why people were paying attention. "You want me to stand up for you now?" he asked. "On TikTok? Make some stupid apology video?" "I wanted you to stand up for me then," I said softly. "At the BBQ. When your mom laughed and I was frozen and you looked at me and chose silence." That night, I turned my phone off for the first time in weeks. The pressure, the attention, the DM sit was too much. I wasn't trying to be a public figure. I wasn't trying to be anyone's rallying cry. I just existed. And the world saw something in my silence that resonated. But even without the screen, the change had already started. I wasn't walking on eggshells anymore. I didn't shrink when Mark got angry. I didn't excuse Dolores's words. I didn't rewrite my reality to make it easier for others to digest. And that shift, small, invisible to most, was tectonic. The next day, Dolores called. I let it ring. She left a voicemail. "This circus has gone too far. I don't know what you told people, but I am not a villain." Then a second message. "I expect you and Mark to shut this down. I have friends. I have a reputation." And a third. "You'll regret this if you don't fix it. Fix it." As if my silence had been the broken thing. By Friday, a podcast I'd never heard of posted an emergency episode titled, "When Your In-Laws Gaslight You and the Internet Fights Back." Guess who it was about? They read from my blog, talked about invisible women. One of the hosts even cried on air. It was overwhelming. It was bizarre. And yet, it felt justified. Not because Dolores deserved to be hated, but because I had deserved to be seen. For the first time, I was. That Sunday, Mark sat me down. He looked tired. Really tired. "I've been thinking," he began. I waited. "My mom, she's always been like this." I nodded. "I guess I never noticed how much it hurt you." "You didn't want to." He exhaled. "I don't know how to fix this." I looked at him, really looked. Not with anger, not with pain, just honesty. "I'm not asking you to fix anything. I'm just watching to see what you choose." He blinked. "What does that mean?" "It means your silence won't be invisible anymore." And with that, the lines were drawn. Not in a fight, not in flames, but in clarity. The world had noticed. Now it was time for me to decide what I wanted to do with the attention, and whether Mark wanted to come with me or stay behind in the silence he had always chosen. It's funny how you don't notice the weight until you finally put it down. For years, I thought I was just sensitive, that I was the problem, that if I could just be more polite, more accommodating, more silent, less, then maybe, just maybe, I would earn a place in the Carter family. Maybe Dolores would smile without the sneer. Maybe Mark would put his arm around me when she made those comments. Maybe someone would notice when I disappeared. But the BBQ joke didn't just go viral. It snapped something awake inside me. I wasn't imagining this. I wasn't overreacting. I wasn't alone. There were thousands of us. Women who had married into families that treated them like intruders. Women whose husbands nodded along to everything except their pain. Women who had learned to laugh at insults because it was safer than being honest. And now, with one offhand comment, Dolores had handed me a microphone I never asked for but deeply needed. I didn't return her calls. Not when she left a voicemail saying, "All families have tension, Julia. You don't air it to strangers." Not when she followed it up with, "You don't understand how the internet works. This is your fault." And not when she finally snapped and hissed through the line, "You're just a petty little girl who couldn't handle being a Carter." What she didn't realize is, I never wanted to be one. Instead, I sat at my desk one morning, turned on the recorder, and did something I had never done before. I told the story out loud. All of it. Not for content, not for virality, but for me. I recorded a voice journal, raw, honest reflection on how I got here. I spoke about the jokes that weren't jokes. The birthday where Dolores gifted me a cookbook titled Meals Men Actually Like. The Christmas dinner where I wore red heels, and she muttered, "At least the shoes are trying." I told the story of sitting on our bathroom floor after Ava was born, holding a crying infant while Dolores suggested that maybe motherhood just wasn't natural for women like me. Mark had nodded, half listening, half scrolling. I told it all, and when I listened back, I didn't hear a woman who was weak. I heard a woman who had been patient. Too patient. Too kind. Too conditioned to prioritize peace over self-respect. And I heard someone I didn't recognize anymore. I uploaded the audio anonymously. I didn't tag anyone. I didn't need to. It wasn't about naming Dolores anymore. It was about reclaiming me. The podcast episode got picked up by a small platform focused on women's stories. They titled it, "The Day I Realized I'd Been Disappearing for Years." It wasn't meant to be viral, but within a week, it hit 500,000 plays. Listeners emailed me. Teachers, nurses, new moms, women in their 60s who said they never stood up to their mother-in-law. Young women who said they listened to my voice while packing to leave their own toxic relationships. I didn't realize how small I'd gotten. One email read, "Thank you for being the mirror." And through it all, Mark remained still. Not cruel, not loud, just still. He wasn't angry about the podcast. He didn't scream. He just avoided it. Like everything else. Like he could ignore the tremor before the quake. He came home from work one evening, loosened his tie, and said, "Dinner?" That was the moment I knew we were done trying. He didn't ask how I was. He didn't ask what I needed. He didn't ask if I still felt like his wife. Because the truth was, I didn't. I wasn't a wife anymore. Not his. Not the family's. I was becoming my own person. Finally, I hired a lawyer the following week. Not for divorce, not yet, but to set up something else. The foundation. You see, every woman who reached out to me, every story I heard, they weren't just echoes. They were evidence of how widespread this quiet erasure was, of how desperately women needed space to be seen. So I decided to build it. A nonprofit platform dedicated to documenting emotional abuse within families, especially in-laws. A place to speak, to heal, to write the endings we choose. I named it, "If I Disappeared," a direct quote from Dolores, now repurposed as a battle cry. Dolores, of course, hated it. When she found out, she sent Mark a message. "She's embarrassing herself now. You need to stop her." But Mark didn't respond. He'd finally realized that this wasn't about a single joke. This was about an entire system he had upheld with his silence. And now, I was done protecting that silence. The day I signed the nonprofit incorporation papers, I stood outside the courthouse with Ava on my hip. She looked up at me with wide brown eyes and asked, "Are you happy, Mama?" I looked at her, me daughter, my witness, my reason, and I said, "I'm getting happy." And for once, I meant it. The first time I said my full name into a microphone, my voice didn't shake. It surprised me. I thought I'd feel exposed, vulnerable, like I'd taken off invisible armor and walked straight into enemy fire. But instead, I felt solid. I was at a panel hosted by a women's mental health initiative. They'd found my podcast and invited me to speak. The topic, Invisible Wounds, Navigating Family Gaslighting and Silent Abuse. At first, I declined, said I wasn't ready. But then I remembered all the women who had messaged me after the anonymous podcast. The stories that started with, "This happened to me too. I've never told anyone this, but I didn't know it was abuse until I heard your voice." So I said yes. The event was in a small auditorium, mostly therapists and community organizers. A modest stage, a few dozen chairs. But when I sat down under the soft lights, facing a room of strangers waiting to hear my story, not Dolores's version, mine, something shifted again. The moderator smiled and asked, "Would you like to introduce yourself?" And I said, "Hi, I'm Julia Carter, and I used to think being polite was more important than being respected." A pause. Then applause. I told the story from the beginning, not with anger, but with truth. I didn't name names. I didn't drag Dolores or Mark. I spoke about erasure. about how emotional abuse isn't always bruises, and yelling sometimes it's laughter that cuts, silence that deafens, and smiles that dismiss. I talked about the weight of being tolerated instead of welcomed. I said the thing I had never said out loud in public before. I disappeared a long time before my mother-in-law ever joked about it. I disappeared in small ways when I said less, dressed safer, laughed quieter. I disappeared every time I let myself be disrespected to keep the peace, but not anymore. They didn't cheer like it was a viral TED Talk. They sat with it. They absorbed it. And when the Q&A started, the first question wasn't really a question. It was a woman maybe in her 60s standing up and saying, "I stayed married to a man like your husband for 34 years. I wish I'd heard this at your age." And that was when I knew this wasn't about Dolores anymore. This was about everybody who had been erased. And everyone's still trying to reappear. The next morning, the clip from my talk went viral. A TikTok creator posted a 60-second excerpt. I disappeared in small ways. But not anymore. It was everywhere. Articles, podcasts, DM requests, speaking invites. I even got a call from a major media outlet asking if I'd be open to an interview for a mini-doc on modern family estrangement. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I just let myself sit with it for once, not rushing to hide or perform. Mark saw the video on LinkedIn of all places. He texted me. "Impressive talk." That was it. Not a call. Not a visit. Just a sentence that tried to reach across a chasm that was now too wide. I didn't reply. Not because I hated him, but because he still didn't get it. It wasn't about going viral. It wasn't about clout or followers. It was about visibility. And Mark? He had always been okay with me disappearing. Dolores, of course, didn't stay silent. 3 days after the video hit 1 million views, she published a statement, if you could call it that, on Facebook. A paragraph buried between posts about her bridge club and a sponsored skincare giveaway. It saddens me that private family matters are being used for internet attention. I have always tried to support my daughter-in-law, despite our differences. I wish her the best. The comments section turned into a war zone. Some defended her. Most didn't. If she disappeared tomorrow, that's not a difference of opinion. That's emotional abuse. You don't get to humiliate someone and then call it a misunderstanding. Support doesn't look like that, ever. One woman wrote, "If Julia disappeared tomorrow, it's clear the internet would riot. Just saying." That night, Dolores called. For the first time, I answered. "Julia," she said. Her voice was calm, rehearsed, practiced. "I'm calling to suggest we clear the air. This has gone far enough." "Clear the air," I repeated. "I think we need to present a united front," she continued. "For the sake of the family. For Mark. For Ava." I smiled. Not out of politeness. Out of clarity. "Dolores, I'm not interested in managing appearances anymore." She sighed. "So you're just going to keep attacking us?" "I'm not attacking anyone," I said. "I'm telling my story. If you don't like how it sounds, maybe you should think about what role you played in it." A pause. "You're not the victim here, Julia." "No," I said quietly. "Not anymore." Then I hung up. That phone call was the last time I spoke to Dolores. Because it wasn't about apologies anymore. It was about boundaries. And boundaries don't require explanations. Just enforcement. The foundation grew faster than I expected. Women sent donations. Others volunteered. Therapists offered free group counseling. We launched a newsletter, a support app, an online archive of anonymous stories. And in the center of it all was the sentence that had started everything. "If Julia disappeared tomorrow." Now printed in bold font on our landing page, and crossed out. Underneath it, "We see you." That year, I spoke at 6 events, was interviewed on 4 podcasts, and helped secure legal aid for women navigating in-law abuse and coercion. But none of it compared to what came next. Because one morning, after my final talk of the year, I came home to find a letter in my mailbox. No return address. Just a handwritten note inside that read, "I'm not proud of how I handled things, But watching you grow, it made me realize I disappeared too. Maybe not as visibly, but still. I'm trying to come back. It was signed, in barely legible script. Mark. I didn't cry. I didn't write back, but I smiled, softly. Because sometimes, silence is the most honest goodbye you can give. The house was quiet when I told him. No thunder, no shouting. Just the soft hum of the fridge and Ava's watercolor drawings fluttering gently from the side of it. Mark had asked to meet. He said he wanted to talk. And to be honest, part of me expected something more dramatic, some kind of grand gesture. An apology wrapped in roses. A last-ditch offer to fix everything. Instead, he sat on the edge of our old couch, shoulders hunched, and said, "I didn't know how bad it got." I nodded. "You didn't want to know." He looked up, surprised at my calm. "I was trying to keep the peace," he said. "You weren't keeping peace," I replied. "You were keeping her comfortable. There's a difference." He didn't argue. That was new. We sat there for a long time, not saying much. Just breathing the same air in a room that had once felt like a home and now felt like a waiting room in a dentist's office sterile. Forgettable, polite. Finally, I said it. "I'm filing for divorce, Mark." He blinked. "You're sure?" "Yes." A silence. Then he nodded. "I figured. I just hoped that it would blow over." I finished for him. "Yeah." "It never should have blown over," I said. "You should have stood up when she made that joke, or when she insulted me after Ava was born, or at the wedding, or before. I thought I was keeping us together. You were keeping us small." I expected to feel guilt after saying it, but I didn't. I felt clear. I wasn't throwing a marriage away. I was walking out of a house that had slowly removed my name from every room. I used to dream of saving us. But now, I was dreaming about saving me. He didn't fight it. Maybe he knew. Maybe part of him was relieved, like he'd never really believed he deserved me. But he had held on because it was easier than facing who he really was. He offered to move out immediately. I agreed. He asked if I'd say anything public. I told him no because that's not who I am. But I wouldn't lie either. "I'm not telling a story that protects your silence," I said gently. "I'm telling one that protects my voice." He nodded, and that was it. The last real conversation we ever had. A few weeks later, Ava asked if Daddy was coming home. I knelt beside her and told the truth. "No, sweetheart. He's living in a new place now, but he loves you very much, and he'll always be part of your life." She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just nodded, her little fingers curled around mine. "Are you okay, Mama?" "I am now," I whispered. And I meant it. I started over, quietly, intentionally. I moved into a small 2-bedroom townhouse with sunlight in the kitchen and a garden in the back. Ava and I could plant things in. The first thing I put up was a print that said, "Leave the table where love is no longer being served." It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't bitter. It was true. I still had the foundation, which was growing rapidly now. We had just launched a scholarship fund for women rebuilding their lives after estrangement or emotional abuse. One of the first recipients sent me a letter. "You gave me the courage to leave. I'm in night classes now. My daughter sleeps beside my books. I finally feel like I'm living." I read it twice, then a third time. Then I cried not because I was sad, but because I realized this is love. Not flowers, not promises, but freedom. The kind of love that doesn't ask you to shrink to fit it. And then came the press. A local news feature on the foundation. They filmed me walking through the garden with Ava, telling the story of the platform, of the community, of the day it all began. The reporter asked, "Do you remember what it felt like? The moment your mother-in-law made that joke?" I smiled softly. "I do. But what I remember more is how it felt afterward when strangers told me I wasn't invisible." She asked, "What would you say to women going through that right now?" I looked at the camera, then down at Ava, who was chasing butterflies between sunflowers, then back up. And I said, "You don't have to wait for someone to save you. You just have to believe that you're worth saving." That night, I sat on the porch as twilight settled in. I didn't miss the old house. I didn't miss Mark. I didn't even miss the idea of the family I once fought so hard to belong to. Because I was building something new now. Not just for me, but for every woman who had been laughed at, dismissed, ignored, or erased. I wasn't a ghost anymore. I was real. I was here. And I was done disappearing. The last time Dolores Carter tried to control the narrative, it came wrapped in pearls and poison. It started with a blog post. A strange one. Someone sent me the link through a burner Instagram account. At first, I thought it was satire until I realized it had her voice all over it. Mother-in-lawhood in the age of cancel culture. A generation that interprets discipline as abuse. When love is mistaken for criticism. She didn't name me, but she didn't have to. She described a daughter-in-law who played victim on the internet and manipulated strangers with selective storytelling. A daughter-in-law who was emotionally unstable, ungrateful, and easily influenced by public opinion. There were even soft-focus stock photos, grandmothers smiling sadly into their teacups, young women with wild expressions captioned, "The New Rage, In-Law Estrangement." She ended the article with, "I hope she finds peace, even if she had to destroy a family to do it." It was designed to trigger me, to lure me back into a war of words, to make me prove something. But I didn't take the bait. I didn't respond publicly. I didn't call Mark. I didn't text a single thing to our family group chat, which, by the way, had now renamed itself Carter Circle, and quietly removed me months ago. I just closed the tab. Then I opened my notes app and drafted a new post for the Foundation newsletter. I titled it, "When They Rewrite the Story Let Them." In it, I wrote, "You are not responsible for someone else's denial. You are not required to debate someone who decided long ago they'd never hear you. You are allowed to walk away, even if they scream that you're the villain while you do. Because truth doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just walks away and doesn't return the call." That issue became our most shared post yet. Not because it was loud, but because it was exactly what so many women needed permission to do. Stop arguing. Start healing. 2 days later, Dolores emailed me. Not through Mark, not through a lawyer. Just straight to my personal inbox like nothing had changed. Subject: clarification. Julia, I'm sure you saw the article. I hope you understand it wasn't meant as an attack. I'm simply protecting my reputation. People have been talking. I think it's important we present a united front, for Ava's sake. Please consider issuing a joint statement. Something neutral. It would mean a lot to the family. I stared at the blinking cursor for a while. Then I clicked archive. Not delete. Not reply. Not rage. Archive. Because she didn't deserve my energy. Because some endings don't need fireworks. Because my peace had become more precious than my need to be understood. A week later, someone posted a TikTok stitching Dolores's article with the caption, "Ma'am, your granddaughter would like to disappear from this narrative." It went viral, again. But I didn't repost. I didn't comment. Because here's what Dolores never understood. I didn't need to win a PR war. I already won the war inside me. Mark didn't reach out either. He'd taken a job in another city. A fresh start, I suppose. We shared custody peacefully, quietly, with Ava at the center. He was polite, on time, respectful, but emotionally, gone. Exactly the way he had been, even when we were still married. And honestly, that was okay. Because the space he left, I had filled it. Not with bitterness, but with growth. I kept building the foundation. We expanded into workshops, partnered with family therapists, developed a mentorship program for women navigating difficult in-law dynamics. Every story that came in reminded me that the system wasn't broken. It was working exactly as it was designed, to silence women through social guilt, shame, and tradition. But we were rewriting the script, one voice at a time. I spoke at a university that spring. A young woman raised her hand at the end and asked, "Do you ever regret how public it all became?" I thought about it. About the BBQ. The joke. The silence. The moment I chose to stop shrinking. And I said, "Number, I regret how long I stayed silent before I started speaking." Because the thing is, when you've spent years whispering your pain into pillows and bathroom mirrors, the first time you say it out loud, it feels like rebellion. But the second time, it feels like release. It's funny how healing sneaks up on you. One morning, you're brushing your daughter's hair before school, sipping coffee in a chipped mug, and you realize you haven't thought about them in days. Not Mark. Not Dolores. Not the family that once made you feel like a guest in your own life. Just peace. Not the kind you fight for. Not the kind that feels like surrender. The kind that simply exists. Like a sunrise you didn't earn, but finally allowed yourself to enjoy. A year had passed since the BBQ. A whole year since she'd said those words. If Julia disappeared tomorrow, no one would even notice. And yet, I had never been more visible. Not because of followers, or headlines, or viral clips, but because I had stepped fully into my own life. I had stopped asking to be chosen. I had stopped performing for a seat at a table that didn't want me. I had built my own table. And women came. They sat. They shared. They healed. Together. On the anniversary of the foundation, we hosted our first in-person retreat, a weekend gathering in Vermont. 50 women from around the country. Some had left marriages. Others were still in them. Some had cut ties with toxic in-laws. Others were quietly building the courage. We stayed in a rustic lodge with a roaring fireplace, mismatched mugs, and no Wi-Fi. For 3 days, we shared stories, laughed, cried, walked trails, made dinner together like a chosen family. On the last night, we sat in a circle under the stars. One woman, Sarah, whispered, "I don't think I've spoken this much in 10 years. Not about the real stuff." Another woman said, "I didn't know what a family felt like until this." I sat beside Ava, who had fallen asleep in my lap with grass in her curls and marshmallow on her chin. And I realized, this is family. Not by blood, but by choice, by values, by safety, by seeing each other. The next morning, I woke early, walked to the lake. The sun was just rising, brushing the sky with lavender and gold. I pulled out my phone and opened the draft of a final blog post I'd been writing. The title? If You Disappeared Tomorrow. But I crossed it out and typed a new one. If You Showed Up for Yourself Today. Because that's the story I wanted to tell now. Not of loss, but of return. Not of disappearing, but of reclaiming. Not of being erased, but of becoming fully present. I published it with a photo. Ava asleep in my lap. The fire behind us, my eyes soft but steady. No makeup, no filters, just us. The caption read, "1 year ago, someone joked that if I vanished, no one would notice. Today, I am more alive, more visible, and more loved than I have ever been. I didn't disappear. I returned to myself. And I will never disappear again." As I stood by the lake, watching the fog lift from the water, I whispered a quiet promise to the woman I used to be. To the Julia who stood frozen with a tray of lemonade and a forced smile, wondering if anyone would notice her pain. I see you. I'm sorry it took this long, but we made it. And if this story resonated with you, I want you to know something. You are not too dramatic. You are not too sensitive. You are not too much. You are enough. And you don't have to disappear to prove it. Not to your in-laws. Not to your partner. Not to anyone. Least of all, yourself. So here's my question for you now. Have you ever had to shrink to be accepted? Have you ever mistaken tolerance for love? Have you ever been told directly or silently that you didn't matter? Then welcome home. We see you. And you never have to disappear again.